The Alabama Booksmith presents Author Spotlight. Because every book in our store is signed, our wall of fame displays a breathtaking array of writers and signatures. Close-up shots reveal giants of literature, acclaimed historians, stars of stage and screen, our nation's leaders, famous sports heroes, and thousands of other esteemed authors. Today's Wall of Fame guest is John Grisham, who will discuss his new book, Sooley. And here's John Grisham with our host, Jake Reese.
Welcome, John Grisham, and welcome to our audience.
Happy to be here.
We are thrilled and honored to chat with one of the world's great storytellers. Before we proceed to the main business, which is talking about Sooley, we'd like to share a quick glance at this remarkable career so far. Today's guest has over 300 million books in print in more than 40 languages, 9 of which have made it to the big screen. He is respected around the globe for his charitable works, too many to cite, but we must mention the Innocence Project and Little League Commissioner. A quick program note. We have saved time at the end to get to as many questions and comments you send in as we can. John, every description we've read of Sooley calls it a basketball book. And of course, that is the focus. And there's a ton we want to ask you about that aspect. But there's so much more. We'll be very careful to not spoil readers' anticipation. But there's great sadness in this book. Yeah. However, after every tragedy, hope seems to appear. I believe many will read as I did, through moist eyes. So let's start with the book's protagonist. Tell us who Sooley is as the story begins.
Sooley is the principal character. His name is Samuel Suleiman. Suleiman is a fairly common name in East Africa. He lives in the country of South Sudan, one of the newest nations on earth, independence in 2011. And we meet him. He's been invited to try out for a national under 18 age basketball tournament that will come to the U.S. in the summertime to play in showcase tournaments. And this is a dream of every kid playing basketball in Africa and many other countries. Sooley makes the team. He leaves and comes to Orlando, where one showcase tournament is underway. And he gets to play, doesn't really impress too many scouts, but he's having a ball. And then some really terrible things happen back home. His village is raided, burned. His family is scattered. He hears about this and takes it very hard. Sooley can't go home. There's no home to go to, and it's too dangerous anyway. He wants to go home and find his family because he's very, very close to his parents and his siblings. He can't go home. And he, again, did not attract enough attention to get a college scholarship offer. But he has a great coach who coaches the South Sudanese national team. Coach has a lot of friends. He twists some arms and he gets Sooley a leftover scholarship from a small school in Durham, North Carolina, the other school in Durham. And so Sooley makes it to campus. And he's very sad. He's worried about his family. He does not know where his family is. They don't know where he is. And he starts the season at Central, North Carolina Central. And he's a redshirt freshman. He's not going to play. He's 6'4", 6'5", but he realizes he's growing at a fairly impressive rate in height, but also in size. He loves the weight room. The way he deals with the tragedy of his family is to get up early in the morning and go to the gym and shoot buckets for a couple hours. And he does this every day. He does it every day, and he is getting better and better and better and bigger and taller. And the season starts with Sooley on the bench. The team is not doing very well at all, and the coach kind of says, we need some players. Some injuries happen, and the roster gets pretty thin. And one night, out of desperation, the coach says, "Forget that red shirt stuff. Get in the game." And Sooley. The legend of Sooley begins. He, in short order, becomes a star, a phenomenal player, and by March Madness, he is the most talked about college basketball player in America. So that's kind of the groundwork right there.
Well, as we get into March Madness, and the legend, as you say, begins, he goes from a bench warmer to a phenom. And North Central is doing quite well. And they beat the Duke Blue Devils. Out of all the serious college basketball champions, why did you defeat the Duke Blue Devils?
Well, I knew the question was coming, and it won't be for the last time. We live in Charlottesville, Virginia, and we are very serious basketball fans. We go to all the UVA home games. My wife's a Tar Heel, so we go to a bunch of Chapel Hill games. And when we're not watching games in person, we're watching on television. We kind of keep up with the ACC schools. It's really great basketball. It has been for a long time. We're Tar Heel fans. We're not really Duke fans. And somebody had to lose. Some number 1 seed had to lose to a number 16 seed. Again, you got to love fiction. And so I had to pick a team to lose, and Duke was easy to pick.
Well, it wasn't so fictional this season.
They had a bad season. It's rare you see Coach K put a team on the floor that can't win most of their games. That's rarely happened in his 40 years at Duke. And this year was really unusual for both schools. Carolina and Duke were way down this year, which rarely happens.
And Kentucky.
Kentucky had a losing record for the first time in 1,000 years. And yeah.
Well, this is an easy segue into your personal basketball interest.
That's a short conversation, Jake.
Oh, wait. As a starting junior on the South Haven, Mississippi high school team, you have told one and all that that squad had less than stellar success. What was your record that year?
It was terrible. We won 1 and lost 24. And the bad thing about that, we were all juniors. It was a brand new high school in my hometown, the suburbs of Memphis, in South Haven, Mississippi. And that's kind of where I grew up. This is where I grew up. And it was a brand new high school. And so we needed players. And so the starting 5 that year, I think we were all juniors, maybe 1 senior. That meant that after losing 24 games, the same bunch was coming back for the following season. And I couldn't go through it again. I just didn't enjoy myself. And I said, okay, I'm going to end my basketball career as a 16-year-old junior and never play again. And the team won more games the following year than anybody expected. They had a good season.
Well, this is coming out of left field. Should we dare ask, is it possible you remember that one game you won?
We beat Water Valley, Mississippi one night. I don't know the score. My most vivid memory of that season was my greatest game. Okay. I was a point guard and I could handle the ball pretty well. And in the first half one night against somebody, I got pretty hot. At halftime, I had 16 points. And we're in the locker room behind as always, and the coach is throwing things, but I'm not hearing a word. I'm just thinking about I've got 16 points the first half, 16 the second half. That's 32. A few more buckets. I might get 40 for the first time, like Pistol Pete. And that's what I really want to do is score 40 points. Maybe I've turned the corner here. Maybe this will bring the scouts to watch me play. This could be my big moment in basketball, scoring 40 points. And that's all I was thinking about. And when the game was over, I was sitting on the bench with 16 points. So, so that's the most I ever scored. And it was that kind of a season.
Oh my. Well, you had mentioned Pistol Pete, and our research informs that Pistol Pete Maravich is your all-time favorite player. Will you please share how you got to watch Pistol Pete play?
I don't know how it happened, to be honest, because when Pistol Pete started playing as a sophomore, freshman couldn't play back then. This was about it was 1967. And I went and checked it last night, February the 24th of 1968. I was a 13-year-old kid in the 7th grade. And our coach somehow got tickets for the LSU Ole Miss game in Oxford, an hour down the road. And I remember vividly Pistol Pete's career because wherever he went for 3 years, I don't care which SEC school or any school that LSU traveled to, every game was standing room only. You couldn't get a ticket. People were hanging from the rafters, clogging up the aisles. I mean, it was a mob scene to watch Pistol Pete. And there we were with great seats, a bunch of kids. And we watched just in disbelief as Pete scored 40 points. That was his average, with 2 men hanging all over him. They tried every way to stop him. There's no way to stop him. And he scored 40. And LSU lost the game to Ole Miss in overtime. And afterwards, we went down to the locker to try to, visit with Pete, but that was not going to be possible. From that moment on, from that game on, I was going to be Pistol Johnny, and my buddy was Pistol Billy, Pistol Tommy. Everybody was Pistol somebody. We were going to be Pistol Pete Maravich, and we played basketball around the clock.
Well, it pains me to say, but he set the NCAA single game scoring record of 69 points against my Alabama Crimson Tide. And that record stood for 20 years. His season average of more than 44 points per game still stands today. And there were no 3-point baskets and
right.
No stop clock.
Right.
No time clock. That's
it's pretty amazing. And he and LSU lost as many games as they won because it was a one-man team. Nobody played defense. It was, the coach was his father, Prince Maravich from North Carolina and NC State, and it was, they weren't well coached. It was a one-man show. And when they played Kentucky, Adolph Rupp would just let him go wild. He would score 60, 65 points against Kentucky, and they would lose by 30. He said, I don't care what Pistol Pete does, nobody else is going to score, and they can't stop us. But every game was just an unpredictable event. But Pistol Pete was going to be the star, and he was for 3 years. He played all 4 years at LSU.
He was a remarkable player, and just for kicks, every now and then we watch an old video, and he's still amazing. I wonder what he would do today against the players out there in the NBA.
Yeah, that's a great question. And back then, people would say, well, okay, or they look back then and say, well, it was all white, which it was. He couldn't do that now. Maybe not, but he had a nice pro career. He got to the
Yeah,
NBA and he could mix it up and he could score. And I don't know what his stats are as a pro, but he had a nice,
not bad.
not bad. He could play with anybody.
Uh, Basketball fans who read Sooley will find it obvious that you knew people to have such an accurate inside info about college coaches' gossip behind the scenes. Will you talk about your sources in that area?
Sure. I know the game well enough to enjoy it as a serious fan, but I also know that there's so much to the game that I'll never really understand. The game, it looks simple, line up and start running and throw the ball in the basket, but it's not that simple. And it's complicated with plays and defenses that switch and change, and strategies depending on who's on the bench taking a break and who's coming in and who do you put in. I mean, there's a lot of balls in the air for a coach. And how many more timeouts do I have? Who's got the most fouls? How many fouls they have? It's a constant barrage of stuff a coach has to process, along with riding the referees and dealing with the fans, and that's what makes basketball so much fun to watch. I realized I didn't know that much about the game, much at the next level, deeper level, and so I went to some coaches, just friends, and players that I've met over the years, and fished around, got some information, and got enough information to be able to tell the story with a lot of authenticity, hopefully make no mistakes. I don't know of any. I'm sure I've made one or two. I usually do. But that's how I went about it. Just talk. That's what I normally do. Even in the legal thrillers, I try to find people who know a subject matter, whether it's the FBI, whether it's judges, or whether it's always go to the lawyers. I can always find lawyers. I go to prisons. I go to places like that to talk to the people who know what I'm trying to write about. And I read a lot. In Sooley, there's a lot of stuff about what's happening in South Sudan. And to learn that, I mean, I haven't been there. To learn that, I read probably a dozen books about South Sudan and the problems. Books written by writers, journalists, observers, politicians. The best books were written by refugees who've actually suffered and survived and gotten out. And they write these incredible stories about their journeys, their assimilation or attempted assimilation into life in the U.S., and about some of the basketball players who've come from there. So that's kind of part of the process. A lot of reading but pleasurable stuff, and good reading, fun stuff. A lot of online magazine articles and YouTube videos of life in refugee camps, and there's a lot of stuff that I could have written about, and I did not want to overdo that because at times it's kind of hard to stomach. The atrocities are, as I say in the book, they're often beyond description, and I didn't want to write all that. So that's how I kind of go about the research. I had the basketball to research, and I had the history of South Sudan and the refugee crisis to research, and those kept overlapping.
Well, they use the term inside baseball, but you were obviously inside basketball with the college scene, the coaches' activities. Anybody who knows a depth of what goes on is going to be impressed. It's spot on, and I didn't notice any mistakes. And while we're talking research, would you share what turned out to be, excuse me, a profound part of the book? Would you tell us about how you researched and nailed the world of professional agents?
I talked to a former player at UVA, a kid I met when he was playing here. And he was not drafted. He'd never dealt with an agent, but his best friend made it to the NBA. And so he knew a lot about that process and how the agents operate, how they approach the players, how they sign up the players and negotiate for them, and the deals and the money and the lifestyle. And that was again, that was a very interesting part to learn how all that happened, because I had no idea. He also talked to me about recruiting. He was recruited, and how different coaches do it differently, and how some coaches are known to be players coaches because they put their players before everything, and they love their players. They want one big family with all their players around, and they'll do anything for their players. That was sort of like the coach at Central that I fictionalized. Other coaches are more standoffish. They don't want to get too close to their players, because there's always going to be a lot of unhappiness on any roster. The kids on the bench never get to play enough, and that can cause problems. So just the different types of coaches that you run into, and the different philosophies of coaching 19-year-old kids. So that was where I found the wealth of information.
Well, it certainly comes across in the book, and I'm so confident that those in the know will get such a charge out of it.
Thank you.
As we have said, this book contains sadness and sorrow and tragedy, but my reflection is that after turning the last page and wiping away my tears, this is truly a special, special, special book that I'm proud to have in my library.
Thank you, Jake. That's very generous of you. You're very kind.
Oh no, it's just incredible. I don't know what I was anticipating, but it was so much more powerful, so much, if you will, so much more book.
Yeah.
I think it's going to. I really do think it'll be required reading in many circles. It should be. Before we begin questions and comments from excuse me, from your fans, we'd like to thank Todd Dowdy at Doubleday and Lara Fan at Penguin Random House for helping bring this superstar to the Booksmith. And we appreciate all of you who took time to send in questions and comments. As you can see, there is a huge stack. We'll get to as many as we can before the clock expires. And John, if I may, I will start with the first one.
Sure.
Clinton Pittman in Birmingham, Alabama asks, what was the best thing about practicing law, and what was the worst thing?
The highlight was winning cases. My first murder trial, I was court appointed, and I was 2 years out of law school, and I had no idea what I was doing. But I was able to convince the jury that my client acted in self-defense, and they found him not guilty. And he was a good guy who'd killed a bad guy. And so that was kind of my theme to the jury. That was an incredible moment. I handled 2 adoptions in my 10 years as a lawyer, and it was a thrill to, under Tennessee law, where the children were born, they would release the baby to the lawyer. had to go get a baby, and both involved young girls who had babies, very young teenagers, and we had great adoptive parents lined up. But to be able to take that child who was 3 days old and walk in my office after a long day at the hospital and hand that off to some new parents was a thrill, just a great moment. Everybody's crying, you know. And then a big moment was winning a couple of lawsuits, civil cases with nice fees and making a little money and dreaming of, you know, becoming a better trial lawyer. The worst part was over time, I got tired of dealing with clients all of my clients were in trouble. And I realized early on that I had a hard time saying no to people who were in trouble, had no money, but they needed my help. And I couldn't turn them away. So I had an office filled with clients who couldn't pay. And that's not a good way to make a living in anything. And so that got to be a grind after a while. But just the frustration of always facing the day with clients who had screwed up their lives, I got tired of that.
Doesn't sound like fun. Lou Fuller of Chattanooga, Tennessee, wants to know: have you maintained your friendship with Stephen King?
We swapped emails Tuesday, publication day, and I send him, every time we publish, I send him a book, he sends me a book. And I got his, the advanced reading copy of his next novel in the mail yesterday, and started reading last night. So yeah, we keep in touch and don't see each other as much as we'd like, but we go in different circles and live far apart, but we do keep in touch. We're still friends.
Well, that answers Lou's question. She also asked, will you write any more Theodore Boone books? My grandchildren love them.
Well, thank you. I hope so. I've written 7. I certainly plan to. I don't know when. I don't have a story yet for number 8. I'll give that some thought probably this fall. But my plans are to revisit Theo every few years with another book and keep him 13 years old forever.
Oh, boy. Debbie Martinelli from Cape May Courthouse, New Jersey, has a comment. She says, and this is my favorite, maybe of the stack: kindly tell Mr. Grisham that this teacher of middle grade reading for almost 40 years and book selling for 30 years says thank you for captivating stories. When my toughest students claimed, quote, I don't like to read, unquote, I would read aloud one of Mr. Grisham's stories, and always those resistant readers would sheepishly ask in a low voice, do you have any more books by that Mr. Grisham? So many thanks for capturing and inspiring the imaginations of young, reluctant readers. Keep writing and keep well.
Thank you. That's very kind.
It was delightful. We loved it. Sherry Sandy, Haslett, Michigan, wants to know, when did you know that you wanted to be a writer?
Very difficult to answer that question because I did not dream of being a writer when I was a kid. I didn't study creative writing in college. I always enjoyed reading, still do, but never thought about writing. It came later in life when I was 30 years old, and I'd been a lawyer for 4 or 5 years, and I sort of created this courtroom drama in my mind and became obsessed with this story about a racially charged murder trial in a small southern town, and the lawyer's the hero. And anyway, that eventually became A Time to Kill. When I started writing it, though, it was like a little secret hobby that I would do whenever I could find a few minutes to play with it. I got more serious about it later, but I never said I'm going to stop being a lawyer, I'm going to be a writer, I'm going to pursue a new career. It didn't happen that way. It was much more gradual. And I started writing and got the habit of writing, and then realized I was going to finish the book. And then when A Time to Kill came out, in 1989, the book didn't sell anything. It was a total flop. I worked on it for 3 years. And so I made it up my mind to write one more book. And if that worked, then I might, write a third book. And the second book was The Firm, which became famous overnight and changed everything in my life, just about. So I think at that moment when The Firm came out, that if you could pinpoint a moment when I said, okay, I'm going to write full time from now on, that would be when The Firm was published and became a bestseller.
Okay, thank you for answering. Doug Downs from Powder Springs, Georgia asks, of all the main characters in your books, which one is most like you and why?
Easy question. A Time to Kill is very autobiographical. I was that lawyer in that small town, a young idealistic attorney in a small town in Mississippi, trying to get ahead with a pretty young wife who's having babies and, not a whole lot of clients who could pay, and dreaming of the big trial, the big courtroom drama where I'd be in the middle of the courtroom with everybody watching, and kind of like Atticus Finch. And so I wrote about what I knew. That's why it's autobiographical. I know the South, and I know the small towns, the people, the religion, politics, culture, music, histories, food. That's where I'm from. That's what I know. That's why it's easy for me to write about that. I've gone back there twice. Once in 2013 with a book called Sycamore Row, where Jake is back in the courtroom, although it's not a criminal trial. And when Sycamore Row came out 8 years ago, we were mildly surprised and pleased to see that how popular Jake was as a character, because of the book. I think also because of the movie. Matthew McConaughey did such a wonderful job portraying Jake in the movie that he made that character famous and sold a zillion more books. And so I vowed in 2013 not to wait 20 years again before bringing Jake back for a big courtroom drama. And that was A Time for Mercy, which came out last fall. But those stories that's to answer your question. Jake is the person most like me.
Not this Jake, that other Jake.
Well, yeah, I wish I could be as handsome as Matthew McConaughey, but that's not going to happen. Few people are.
Chris Ciccarella of Birmingham, Alabama asks, is there another of your books in which you plan a sequel?
I am writing a book right now, halfway finished, with the next legal thriller. They'll be out in October. 6 years ago, I published a book called The Whistler, and the protagonist was a 35-year-old female lawyer in Florida whose job is to investigate allegations of corruption against judges. That's her job. Every state has some kind of panel that takes complaints against judges and investigates or whatever. Well, that's her job. Lacey's her name. That's her job in Florida. And in The Whistler, she got after some really big time crooks and put them all in prison. She's back now in The Judge's List is the name of the book. And she is following a judge who is really doing some bad things. So that's a teaser for The Judge's List. It's not really. It's more of a series. It's not really a sequel. To me, a sequel kind of continues the first plot you read into the next phase of that. So it's not really a sequel. It's more of a series.
With the same characters. So Chris has a part B. Have you had a cameo in any of your movie adaptations? And if not, would you consider one for the upcoming HBO adaptation of A Time for Mercy?
Well, no, I've not been asked to do a cameo, probably because they realize that there's no acting talent whatsoever, and they don't want to screw up a good movie. I have been in a movie, one that no one has seen. 20 years ago, I wrote a screenplay for a Little League baseball movie called Mickey, and we filmed it 20 years ago around here in Virginia. And a buddy of mine, Hugh Wilson, was a Hollywood director. He lived here. We had some fun doing the movie, financed it ourselves, lost a ton of money because nobody went to see it, and we couldn't even get it distributed. But in the movie, in the budget, there was $10,000 set aside for an actor to play the Little League commissioner in charge of the draft, the Little League draft, which is a crucial moment in any Little League season when you're trying to evaluate talent of 11 and 12-year-old kids. And I've been through those drafts, so I know the pressure. And I saw where we were going to pay somebody $10,000 to do what I do every year in my Little League baseball park. I do the draft. And I said, okay, we're not going to spend $10,000 because Hugh and I were writing the checks. And when we said, okay, let's save some money, I'll be the commissioner in the movie. And so it became kind of a joke. And I got a bunch of my Little League coaches from the ballpark, my ballpark, and we all sat around the table with a couple of professional actors. Thank God they were there. And we filmed half of one day going through the Little League draft. So that was my screen appearance. You're never going to see it because the movie totally flopped and nobody has ever seen it. So I have made my acting debut, such as it is. I hope it never happens again.
Well, that's a great answer. Ala Turner of Portland, Maine says, thank you for The Innocent Man. Would you share what brought you to this case?
What brought me to the case was a beautifully written obituary in the New York Times in early December of 2004. And it was the lead obituary that day. The Times has great obituaries. And there was a picture of a guy standing in a courtroom with a badly fitting suit on, looking confused and uncertain. And he and I were the same age, same race, same socioeconomic background, a lot of similarities. And the headline of the obituary said, Ronald Keith Williamson, freed from death row, dies at 53. And that's a pretty good hook. And so I read the obituary. In the first paragraph, I used to quote it, Ronald Keith Williamson, who left his small town in Oklahoma with dreams of major league glory, but was later sent to prison for murder he did not commit and came within 5 days of being executed, died last Saturday in a nursing home in Tulsa. He was 53. The cause was cirrhosis of the liver. And the obituary goes on, and you realize as you read it that fiction cannot touch that. But in his corner of Oklahoma, southeastern corner of Oklahoma, it's more like the Deep South than the Wild West. But many people in that, many coaches and scouts in that area thought that Ron Williamson was the next Mickey Mantle, who was from a small town in Oklahoma. And Ron certainly thought so. He had a big player, big ego. He thought he was destined for greatness. He was the first round draft pick of the Oakland A's in 1972. And as a former baseball player in high school and a big dreamer, that was my dream, was to play at that level. Anyway, it's just a great story. And I thought, how could this town, he was a local sports hero. He was the biggest thing in Ada, Oklahoma. How could the town turn on him? What happened to send him to death row for somebody else's murder and almost kill him? And I just became infatuated with the idea. I had never written nonfiction before. I'm not trained as a journalist. I didn't know what I was doing. But by the end of the day, Ron had two sisters who survived him, no wife, no children. And I had contacted both sisters, and I had a book. I had a book to write. And that's how I found that story, and that's why I wrote that book.
It was a powerhouse. Chris Robinson of Jasper, Alabama, wants to know, is there any chance of another collection of short stories? I loved Ford County. Blood Drive was incredible, and Funny Boy was harrowing and touching. This book holds its weight with Faulkner and Flannery O'Connor.
Well, thank you, first of all. Those are some pretty incredible comparisons. I don't know. I struggle with short fiction. I have those 7 stories. I have not written a real short story since then. That was published 13 years ago. I don't know. I think about it from time to time. I have a lot of ideas that I really like that they probably will not hold up as full-length novels. So I'm always pondering what to do with them. Do I put 3 or 4 novellas together and publish that? I don't know. I really like the stories, but they're all too long. When Ford County came out, or when I turned it in, my agent took it to the big magazines and said, "Would you like to publish one of John's stories?" Or, and they all said no for various reasons. But the common theme was they're just too long. There's too many words for a short story in a magazine, and they were right. So I don't like to write long books, 500-page novels. I don't like to read those. But I have trouble writing short stuff. I have to have a beginning, a middle, and a very powerful ending to have a real story. And that's not always the way you write short stories. And it's not, I don't read a lot of short stories. I do occasionally. I love Flannery O'Connor. I love Eudora Welty. I love Raymond Carver. I mean, there are a lot of people I read or have read. I just don't know if I'll go back and do that again. I can't say yes or no, because I've learned some things in 30 years. And one thing is that I cannot predict what I'm going to be inspired to write next year.
Great. Well, thank you. And we'll have time for a couple more. Tom Gaskin of Point Clear, Alabama asks, would you consider a book based on huge healthcare companies like Tenet?
For many years, I've had a big novel rattling around about healthcare, insurance companies, medical malpractice, politics, doctors, hospitals, and I can't get the story. The story is, I think, just too big to condense to a novel. That's on one part of my brain. The other part of my brain, I've got a story about the opioid crisis and big pharma and the pill mills and doctors and the victims and the manufacturers. And that's rattling around too. And I just can't get my head around those issues. I mean, those competing issues and interest to put together a novel. It may happen. I mean, it may happen tomorrow. I may read a story tomorrow about healthcare or opioid or whatever, and say, okay, here's my novel. Here's my stuff. I finally got it. Okay. I've done a lot of reading, but yeah. To answer, yes, I will consider it. I've been considering it for a long time.
Dolores Barnowski in Bonifay, Florida comments, I read the Testament because it was recommended by missionary friends in Brazil. As they had a skimpy budget, I bought a dozen used copies to distribute, and all agreed it was a very close description of missionary life in Brazil.
Yeah. I went down there. I used to go a lot on mission trips, mainly medical mission trips to some of the outlying regions of Brazil, and had a lot of great adventures, and was inspired by some real events to write the book.
And as the time clock is about to expire, it's serendipity to end with a comment mentioning a friend of yours and one of my personal book selling heroes. Marilyn Porter in Little Rock, Arkansas, writes, "Mary Gay Shipley is my dear friend. Will that name help me fill in 2 missing signed titles from my collection?" And then she adds, "Actually, I really just wanted to thank you for your wonderful books and getting this one out in time for Mother's Day." Mary Gay Shipley.
You're very welcome. Mary Gay has been a dear friend for 30 years, a big supporter. When she had her store, and she closed it a few years ago, we still keep in touch, and she checks on my Aunt Sammy in Monette, Arkansas. So Mary Gay's an old buddy.
Her husband has some family here, and we get to see her. Hadn't seen her in a while.
Mm-hmm.
Well, as we thank you so much for this visit, we'll take personal privilege and confess that our one great regret in more than 30 years in this business is that we were 1 year late in opening and did not have the opportunity to host a first-time writer from our neighboring state. We had liked to think that maybe we would have added Alabama to the John Grisham list. We'd love to start making up 32 years and 46 books late by making the judges list for a real visit in October. But again, thank you so much. We are so grateful and appreciate your time so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Jake. My pleasure. Good seeing you. I'll see you again. Okay. Take care.
Well, we're going to hold you to that. And thanks to all of you for watching. You may purchase signed first editions of Sooley at alabamabooksmith.com.